2022 will be remembered as the year that Türkiye and much of the Arab world saw relations dramatically improve. For years, several conflicts across the Middle East and North Africa forced countries to side against one another. And the blockade of Qatar also pushed the region into competing camps, upending trade and transport for millions of people. But in January, things started to change. Let's take a look at this report.
Türkiye olarak tüm Körfez ülkeleriyle olan birlikteliğimizi, dayanışmamızı, bundan sonraki ilişkileri çok daha güçlenerek devam ettirmekten yanayız.
Mısır halkıyla olan ilişkilerimiz farklı. Tarih orada var. Tabii son dönemde bir 9 yıllık bir süreç içerisinde bir sıkıntı yaşadık. Tabii o akşam özellikle de Katar emirinin araya girişiyle bu adımı attık. Nasıl Mısır'la bu iş yoluna girdiyse aynı şekilde Suriye ile de bu iş yoluna girebilir. Siyasette küslük olmaz.
And to further discuss this dramatic turnaround in relations across the Middle East, joining me now from Rome is Valeria Giannotta. She is the scientific director of the Center for Politics and International Studies Observatory on Türkiye. And from Exeter, UK, Jonathan Fenton-Harvey. He is a freelance journalist focusing on political, social and humanitarian issues in North Africa and the Middle East. And lastly, from Istanbul, Ammar Kahf. He is the executive director of the Omran Center for Strategic Studies. A warm welcome to you all, and thanks for joining me on Straight Talk. So over the last few years, Turkey's relations with much of the Arab world have been anything but cordial, but things have dramatically changed this past year. So Valeria, could you walk us through the most significant developments in Türkiye-Gulf relations as this year draws to a close?
Yes, definitely. As you said, it has been a very interesting year. And actually, in order to understand this kind of new friendly relations with some Gulf countries and in the Middle East, we should adopt a systemic and regional perspective. in a way that already some normalization process has started between Arab states after the Al-Ula agreement between the Gulf states and the readmission of Qatar in the alliance, I will say. And then some other rapprochement were recorded between not Arab states and Arab states, including Türkiye, Israel, and Iran, for example. And also, we should consider the international perspective, because, I mean, since the withdrawal of US from the Middle East, a sort of uncertainty has been recorded. We shouldn't neglect the Afghanistan case and the most recent crisis in the Black Sea that had a significant impact with the West, actually. I mean, signing the fact that the West is not so able to protect its own alliance in the region, if we want to put these things in this way. Of course, it comes the role of Türkiye, who is acting as a balancing actor in the region, and it has a dramatical importance at diplomatic level, political level, and economic level and military level as well.
So, Jonathan, has this been an easy process? I mean, what main factors pushed sides to normalize ties after years of mistrust and sometimes animosity?
I mean, a lot of the dynamics that existed 4 or 5 years ago when these tensions were at their peak have largely changed now. A lot of these divisions were able to occur under the auspices of Donald Trump, who wasn't very effective at normalizing peace within larger actors across the region, despite claiming alleged victory over the Abraham Accords. So since that time, we've obviously had significant changes across the world, starting with the coronavirus crisis, which really disrupted global supply chains, took a massive toll on the economy. And then global inflation has become an increasingly problematic issue. And with the war in Ukraine as well, that has further hit supply chains and has massively increased prices of staples and ordinary goods, creating a large consumer crisis globally. So I think all these factors as well, as quite rightly mentioned before, the US's withdrawal from Afghanistan and being perceived as an unreliable peace broker in the Middle East, has forced domestic states, well, regional states, to look more at their own domestic issues more, to prioritize that, particularly with these economic and security concerns. So this has largely sidelined a lot of the traditional rivalries that existed in the Middle East and the wider region before. So this has largely encouraged this rapprochement.
So you say this is mainly because of the US's kind of withdrawal from the region?
Yes, it is a large factor. I mean, one factor that has been proposed is that Biden's presidency, the prominence of Joe Biden trying to take a more diplomatic role in the region, has been a factor. But I still think personally that has been largely overstated, and that these wider economic and security issues across the world and in the region have pushed states together, because there are more pressing issues, like I said, with economy, security, and other matters as well. So I think this is something that could particularly accelerate as these issues continue.
So let's bring in Ammar. I mean, Ammar, is this normalization genuine, and where does trust between the two sides, let's say, need to be re-established the most?
I mean, definitely the world after the Ukraine war is not the same as before. And so I think one of the ticking factors has been the Russian aggression in Ukraine, and reshuffling a lot of the regional alignments vis-a-vis also the U.S. Yes, the U.S. has deserted the Gulf states during, as far as 2019, the Aramco attacks and so forth. So them feeling insecure in terms of their national security with regards to Iran, and as well as in Turkey having been the links between Türkiye and the rest of the Arab world has been disrupted significantly in the last few years. And so I believe with the external threats and the economic threat of the supply chain issue after the corona pandemic, all of those factors reached out to say that these countries have to deal with these local, regional issues first, and not rely on their U.S. partner to come in and provide safety for them. And so I think that's one of the major incentives, is both economical and security-wise. So those two, I think those two were the main driving factors. And the ticking point, or the point of inception, was the Ukraine war, that really shook this narrative to another direction, that they need each other more than they disagree with each other.
So, Valeria, how do you read the Turkish politics from that perspective? I mean, does Turkey approach this normalization process as a whole, or do some particular countries stand out differently, maybe easier to reconcile?
Well, definitely there is a genuine approach by Erdogan's Türkiye, but of course there are some difficulties. We can see that the normalization process has been accomplished with Israel, and actually historically the bilateral relations has been always ups and downs. I mean, it's something related, I would say, to DNA of the bilateral relations between Tel Aviv and Ankara. With some Gulf countries, for example, the United Arab Emirates, the normalization process has been quite smooth. Actually, Abu Dhabi has been acting as a flyer for the further normalization and rapprochement with Saudi Arabia, for example. Yes. But in this case, the situation is not been accomplished yet. I mean, we are still talking about a comprehensive agreement on certain areas, in a way that the main areas of frictions have been made up, but still there is a way to go. On the other hand, there is the situation with Egypt, which is still going on. I mean, there are diplomatic efforts behind the scenes going on since a long time, but we cannot talk about a genuine rapprochement or normalization yet.
Yes. So, Jonathan, efforts to normalize ties first began between Turkey and the United Arab Emirates. How do you think this has impacted the trajectory of Turkey-Saudi Arabia relations? I mean, where do they stand now?
I mean, largely the UAE was a leading actor in isolating traditional relations with Turkey and Qatar as well within the Gulf Cooperation Council. So it is right to point out that it was a driving force behind these divisions. Now I think that because of the leading economic problems that we face in the world, this has encouraged it further. Particularly, one of the leading points of difference between Saudi Arabia and Turkey was the Saudi unofficial boycott of Turkey from 2020. Yes. That has all but been resolved earlier this year, particularly even just before President Erdogan and Mohammed bin Salman's meeting in June earlier this year. So I think particularly one area that Saudi Arabia is looking to increase is travel and tourism and hospitality. It's, like I say, given these big economic crises we see across the world, it would be quite harmful for two of the biggest economies in the region to ignore each other. So it makes sense to have more economic integration because of that. And particularly from Saudi Arabia's point of view, it is looking to diversify its economy more, move away from its dependency on oil, yes, and supposedly modernize its economy. So increased investment from a wide range of sources would be very important for that. And many of these challenges affect the UAE as well. So as we can see, there is a widespread shift within the Gulf, yes, from powers that were antagonistic towards Turkey.
So speaking of, So speaking of integration, Ammar, could this latest round of efforts to mend ties among regional countries be interpreted as a move to contain Iran? I mean, how does Iran view this diplomatic flurry, you think?
I mean, I believe Iran does not view this very positively, and even the extreme and most difficult, perhaps, cases in Syria, Iran still views itself as the main regional player in Syria, Yemen, and many other regional states. And so the moment Turkey or any other country steps in, they view this as a competition, if not a threat. So I believe this would be one of the obstacles, at least in the coming period, of how Turkey will deal with Iranian interferences across the Arab world. That will be something that we need to observe in 23.
So, Valeria, you briefly mentioned, meanwhile, Israel's incoming Prime Minister, Netanyahu, has told Saudi Arabian television that normalization with Riyadh is key to peace between Israel and Palestine. How imminent do you think this normalization is, and how do you think Türkiye and Israel relations be under Netanyahu's leadership?
I think the ideological side will be put aside. I mean, this is the time of thinking and acting in terms of real politics, and also the energy issue is playing a vital role. We shouldn't neglect the EastMed project actually has been definitely failed. And there is on the table the energy card, the energy project between Ankara and Tel Aviv in order to carry the Israel gas to Europe as well. And this is an asset for Turkey in order to diversify the energy supply from Russia as well. I mean, we shouldn't neglect we are living in a very peculiar time of energy crisis. So this, in my opinion, will play a vital role. When it comes to Palestine and Jerusalem, of course, Ankara is not keen to make any concessions. I mean, as President Erdogan said, this is our red line. So despite these important frictions, I would say that the normalization and collaboration between Tel Aviv and Ankara will go on. When it comes to Saudi Arabia, of course, again, the energy issue is of vital importance. I mean, in one side, we have Türkiye, who is a regional actor and providing stability and security. And also we are discussing between Riyadh and Ankara on deploying the Turkish drone, I mean, supplying the Turkish drone to Saudi Arabia. Yes. On the other side, Saudi Arabia is one of the most important powerhouse in the region. So I think combining together these two economies will be an asset in reshaping the regional logic, as it was mentioned before, also in the light of containing Iran.
So, Jonathan, while in Qatar for the World Cup's opening, President Erdogan had a surprise handshake with Egypt's President CeSPI, and he said there's no room for hard feelings in politics. What do you make of this, and how do you think talks on reconciliation between the two countries will proceed?
Well, this largely comes within a wider regional shift. As we've seen, the World Cup enabled many heads of state who were particularly at odds with one another before to come together and shake hands and embrace. So we saw that within the Gulf Cooperation Council as well. Mohammed bin Salman, Mohammed bin Zayed of Abu Dhabi, and of course the Emir of Qatar all shook hands. And I think particularly that does show that heads of state are putting aside their traditional differences that had separated one another at the same time. Of course, there will be issues needed to be addressed within Turkey and Egypt's relations going forward. But I think that the signs, largely as this does come within a wider rapprochement of these traditional competitors in the past, does show that there will be more efforts, at least, to see common ground, to heal these divisions and actually make sure that they can move forward. And generally, I can see this as opportunistic for the ties between the two countries, as well as the wider region.
So, Ammar, how could Ankara and Cairo navigate their relations without stepping on each other's toes?
Well, I think they have way more in common than divides them. One of the biggest files would be perhaps the issue of the Mediterranean energy and division of lines and borders. That's a major issue that has to be overcome in 23, based on communal dialogues between both countries. So I think that's one of the major obstacles that will be up for a challenge in 23. Other than that, I think there's a lot of there's not many major, big obstacles on the course of reconciliation between them.
Egypt has unilaterally, Valeria, put out a decree declaring its maritime borders with Libya, and officials in Ankara said it did not overlap with Turkey's continental shelf. What do you make of this latest Egyptian move? Is it likely to complicate matters in the Eastern Mediterranean further? And because we also know that Turkey has called on both sides, Tripoli and Cairo, to get together and discuss this issue, do you think Turkey's calls will be heeded?
No, I think this is a way out in order to go on with the normalization and the dialogue. I mean, of course, there was Egypt has proven once again before sort of caring about the delimitation of territorial water of Türkiye. And also, Cairo has to recognize the fact that Türkiye is one of the key players in Libya. I mean, despite the past frictions, while Cairo was siding with General Haftar, and in open contrast with Turkey. So I think there are some positive signals in the rapprochement with Egypt. The only thing that may play a negative role is a sort of mistrust between the leaders, more from the Egyptian side, I would say. I mean, it's more a personal issue nowadays. I mean, we shouldn't neglect the support granted by Turkey to the Muslim Brotherhood, something that Al-Sisi could not really digest. I would put in this way.
So, Jonathan, as relations between Turkey and Egypt are taking shape, is Syria the next in line? And how will warmer relations between Turkey and the regional countries impact the situation in Syria moving forward?
Well, I think one of the biggest flashpoints for Turkish and Syrian relations has been the presence of Iran, particularly. And this is also one of the driving factors behind a rapprochement between Türkiye and the Gulf Cooperation Council. And I particularly think this could see more collaboration between the two sides I mentioned before in this regard. So particularly as Iran does still have a presence in Syria, as it does in Iraq and Lebanon, this would be an obstacle in that sense. So if Turkey and the Gulf Cooperation Council are able to engage with Syria more, and that would encourage Syria to move more away from Iran's sphere of influence, I do believe then that could see more rapprochement in that sense as well. And of course, at the same time, even though there is the idea of the United States having a drawdown in the region, it still is very influential, in particular how it has tried to penalize actors from engaging with Syria through the Caesar Act from Donald Trump's era, which Biden has been a bit more lax on it in practice, but he has still continued the traditional stance that his predecessor had to an extent as well.
Yes. So, Ammar, would you agree with Jonathan? He says Iran is one of the biggest obstacles before that, but President Erdogan had also proposed a trilateral mechanism with Russia and Syria, which was viewed positively by the Russian leader, Putin. Is Putin the only one to help resolve this issue between Ankara and Damascus? I mean, how complicated is the situation, you think?
I mean, I think Syria poses many complications that go regional, international, and domestic, both in Turkey, but also domestic within Syria or within the different parts of Syria. So Russia is perhaps at its weakest point in the conflict in Syria. It still maintains power, both politically and militarily, but currently with the distraction in Ukraine, is being distracted in Syria, and so it's not. I don't believe that it's able to broker a real deal that fulfills the objectives of Türkiye, both in terms of return of refugees. I mean, the Assad regime has bluntly stated many times that he does not want any refugees back in Syria, and cannot afford it. And so it's not only they can't afford it. They already confiscated lands, are building, new lands, new properties. So there's a lot of complications here, and you have also the security terrorist threat through the PKK and other groups. So there's a lot of issues at stake here, and I think Turkey is trying to dissect through them and trying to break them into smaller pieces so we could hopefully reach some reconciliation. But it's really a long process. that requires a lot of regional actors, including GCC countries.
All right, Ammar, Jonathan, and Valeria, unfortunately, we are out of time. Thank you very much for joining me on Straight Talk.